Angela Prichard was the kind of woman who noticed everything, and it was that sharp attention to detail that helped uncover the darkest secret Millfield had ever seen. Randall Miles was the quiet handyman no one suspected, until Angela's own words left behind in hidden files and journals began pointing directly at him. In a haunting twist, it was Angela herself who built the case that would lead police to her killer even after she was gone. This is the story of how one woman solved her own murder. Angela Prichard had always been a familiar face in Millfield. Flyers went up across Millfield. Volunteers searched nearby woods, walking trails, and empty fields. Her bank account hadn't been used. No one had seen her leave her home. There were no signs of distress, no signs of a struggle, and no leads. Police initially considered the possibility that she had chosen to walk away from her life. But to those who knew Angela, that theory didn't fit. She had a deep love for routine. She never left town without telling someone. Inside were dozens of text files, each carefully dated and titled. As he opened the first few, Kyle's eyes widened. Angela had been keeping digital notes records of incidents she believed were connected, all pointing to something she had never shared out loud. Her plants were watered on a strict schedule. Her books were sorted alphabetically. Nothing about this seemed voluntary. At the time, she thought it was just her imagination. But as the months passed, she began to notice more strange occurrences in marked envelopes left in her mailbox with no return address, unfamiliar footsteps outside her bedroom window at night, and cars idling across the street long after midnight. Angela hadn't dismissed these things entirely, but she didn't panic. Instead, she started writing. The local newspaper ran a story with Angela's photo-brown hair tucked behind one ear, soft smile, and eyes that looked both curious and cautious. Or had something darker happened behind the walls of her cozy home? Everyone had questions, but the only person with answers, Angela herself, was nowhere to be found. The curtains were drawn halfway, casting long shadows across the floor. He moved slowly, unsure what he was looking for. Maybe a clue, maybe a sign that she had planned to leave. As he opened her nightstand drawer, he noticed something small tucked beneath a stack of notebooks. A plain black flash drive, unlabeled, easy to miss. Curious, he took it home and plugged it into his laptop, not expecting much. The headline read, "Beloved librarian, missing community seeks answers," but no answers came. She worked as the librarian at the local elementary school, where students adored her for the way she brought stories to life. Her coworkers assumed she might be sick, especially since flu season had just begun. Officers arrived later that afternoon and found Angela's car parked in the driveway. Her family had come together to support one another, alternating between shock, grief, and numb determination. Her younger brother Kyle Prichard had taken it upon himself to manage her affairs while the investigation continued. Though Angela's home had already been searched by police, they had been careful not to disturb personal belongings that might comfort her family if she ever returned. Now, Kyle found himself going through her things with a heavy heart. The doors were locked. From the outside, everything looked normal. No broken windows, no signs of a break-in. After entering the home with a spare key Angela had given her neighbor, police noted that nothing appeared out of place. Her kitchen was clean, her bed neatly made, and the living room was tidy. Her phone was found on the nightstand, plugged into its charger. Her keys, wallet, and purse were missing. That detail was especially strange. Angela never left the house without them. But by Wednesday, concerns started to grow. She still hadn't contacted the school, and she wasn't answering calls. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By Thursday, Angela's neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Temple, began to worry. She hadn't seen Angela leave the house in days. Her porch light was on in the middle of the day, and the trash cans, which Angela always took to the curb religiously, remained by the garage. Adults in the community knew her as quiet, reliable, and polite. She lived alone in a modest two-bedroom house on Oak Street, surrounded by well-kept gardens and stacks of mystery novels. Angela led a simple life, but she was not boring. Her curiosity about the world showed in her carefully kept journals and her habit of researching anything that didn't sit right with her. That quiet determination would become important later, though no one knew it yet. On the morning of October 22nd, a Tuesday, Angela didn't show up to work. It was unusual but not immediately alarming. Mrs. Temple called the police to request a welfare check. A missing persons report was officially filed that evening. Surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras didn't show Angela's car moving in the days leading up to her disappearance. The quiet town of Millfield grew restless. Whispers turned into theories. Was Angela hiding? Was she taken? 2 weeks had passed since Angela Prichard's disappearance, and the hope of finding her alive was beginning to fade. On a gray Sunday afternoon, Kyle entered Angela's bedroom. The flash drive held a single folder named "In Case Anything Happens." In one file, dated nearly a year earlier, she described seeing a man outside the library watching her from his car. At the time, she thought it was just her imagination. But as the months passed, she began to notice more strange occurrences and marked envelopes left in her mailbox with no return address, unfamiliar footsteps outside her bedroom window at night, and cars idling across the street long after midnight. Angela hadn't dismissed these things entirely, but she didn't panic. Instead, she started writing. Her entries became more focused as time went on. She began recording license plate numbers, times of day, and locations. It belonged to Randall Miles, who still lived in town and had never been considered a suspect. Until now, he had remained just another face in the background. But Angela's records forced everyone to take a second look. They paid him a visit at his home, under the pretense of a routine follow-up. Officers photographed it and noted a few dents and scratches, but there was nothing clearly suspicious. Still, something about Randall didn't sit right. Investigators began a quiet background check, looking deeper into his history than anyone had before. That's when cracks began to show. Police brought him in for a formal interview. Again, he maintained his innocence, showing little emotion. His story didn't change. Word spread fast in Millfield, and Randall's name was now on everyone's lips. The community had held vigils, plastered flyers on every pole and shop window, and searched every wooded area within miles. But as weeks dragged on, people returned to their routines. The case was no longer front-page news. Angela's name was still spoken, but more in whispers now, less in hope, more in resignation. Some defended him, others were convinced of his guilt. The investigation stalled, but Angela's files continued to guide the detectives. She had lit a fuse before vanishing. A small mound of rocks near the base of a tree looked deliberately placed. Curious, the man began to move the stones and uncovered a torn backpack, half buried in frozen soil. He immediately called police. All they could do now was wait, hoping that fuse would lead them to something that couldn't be denied. Without a confession or solid forensic proof, they couldn't hold him. He was released after hours of questioning. Randall allowed them in, but seemed mildly irritated, not nervous. He had legally changed it a decade earlier after moving to Millfield. Randall hadn't made a bank transaction in over 6 months. He used prepaid cell phones that were impossible to trace. Surveillance footage from around Angela's home showed a vehicle resembling his red truck circling the area multiple times in the days leading up to her disappearance. While the footage wasn't clear enough for a definitive ID, it aligned with Angela's suspicions in her notes. Before that, he had lived in Missouri, where he'd been briefly questioned, in connection with the disappearance of a young woman in 2010. That case had gone cold, and Randall had left town soon after. The new identity and quiet life he built in Millfield had helped him stay under the radar. When asked about Angela, he said he remembered her from the school, where he had repaired a broken window months earlier. He denied having any recent contact with her and claimed he hadn't been in her part of town for weeks. His calm, flat tone raised a few eyebrows, but without hard evidence there was little the police could do, and what they were about to uncover would shake the town even more than her disappearance had. In several files, she mentioned a red pickup truck that seemed to follow her at odd hours. The notes weren't just paranoid ramblings, they were detailed, consistent, and grounded in observable facts. Angela had been building a case long before anything had officially gone wrong. She wrote that the driver always looked away when she noticed him. Eventually, she connected the truck to a man named Randall Miles, a handyman who had worked at the school for a short period earlier that year. In one of the final entries, dated just 3 days before she went missing, Angela wrote, "If anything happens to me, start with the man who owns the red pickup truck. I think he's watching me. I think he's waiting." That sentence hit Kyle like a punch to the chest. He immediately brought the flash drive to the police. Investigators began reviewing the files, retracing the names and events Angela had documented. The red pickup truck became the first real lead in Angela's case. He was a quiet man in his late 40s who worked as a handyman fixing leaky pipes, patching roofs, and repairing fences for anyone who paid in cash. He lived on the outskirts of town in a small, weather-beaten house that backed up 2 acres of woods. Most people described him as standoffish but harmless. He kept to himself and rarely spoke more than a few words. Angela Prichard's notes, however, painted a different picture. The name Randall Miles had surfaced before in Millfield, but only in passing. After receiving the flash drive from Kyle, investigators wasted no time tracking down Randall. The red pickup Angela had mentioned was parked in his driveway. It was dusty and appeared to have not moved in days. They discovered Randall Miles wasn't his birth name. Armed with this information, police applied for warrants to access his phone records and financial activity. But they found only deepened the mystery. Even with these findings, there was still no physical evidence linking Randall to Angela's disappearance. The town began to buzz. Winter had begun to settle over Millfield when the next piece of the puzzle revealed itself. 3 months had passed since Angela Prichard disappeared. Then, on a frigid January morning, a hiker exploring a remote forest trail 15 miles west of Millfield came across something unusual. A small mound of rocks near the base of a tree looked deliberately placed. Curious, the man began to move the stones and uncovered a torn backpack, half buried in frozen soil. He immediately called police. Investigators arrived within the hour. The bag was old and weathered, but intact. Inside, they found several personal items: a cracked, compact mirror, a tube of lipstick, a partially used journal, and a library card belonging to Angela Prichard. Alongside it was a smartphone with a shattered screen, its casing scraped as if it had been dragged or dropped. The journal was water-damaged, but many entries were still legible. Angela had written about her growing fear, documenting every strange occurrence in detail. And thanks to Angela's relentless documentation, police now had enough to confront Randall with more than just suspicions. Police arrived at his home in the early morning hours, this time not with questions but with a warrant. Randall offered no resistance. The trial began just 6 weeks after Randall's arrest. Prosecutors presented a tight, compelling narrative, largely built from Angela's own notes, journal entries, and digital files. The flash drive, recovered backpack, and journal all detailed a pattern of harassment and fear that pointed directly to Randall. True crime podcasts, news outlets, and television specials all began to cover the case. But one detail stood out above all others. Angela had helped solve her own murder. She was more than a victim. She was the author of her own justice. It's by trusting her instincts, documenting everything meticulously, and preparing for the worst, she had created a map that led straight to her killer. She had sensed something was wrong and refused to ignore it. Even in her final days, she had remained careful, aware, and determined to leave behind a trail that someone could follow. Although grainy, confirmed the presence of his truck near her home repeatedly, especially in the days leading up to her disappearance. Her careful notes had spoken when she could not. In the end, her courage had forced the truth into the light. He was silent as they handcuffed him, silent as he was read his rights, and silent as they placed him in the back of the cruiser. His face, blank and pale, gave nothing away. But investigators were no longer relying on instinct. They had a mountain of evidence. Much of it gathered by the very woman he was accused of killing. They had evidence. They had motive. And most importantly, they had her voice speaking, even after death. She described how she felt watched, even in her own home. It had led investigators straight to the barnland owned by Randall's cousin. A man who had spoken to Randall in years, and had used the property since before Angela vanished. He stuck to the same claim he had made months earlier, that he had not seen Angela in a long time, that her suspicions were mistaken. But his prior connection to another unsolved disappearance in Missouri worked against him. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. After just 6 days of testimony, Randall Miles was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of human remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No logical explanation existed for Angela's body being there other than Randall having placed it himself. She noted specific dates and times she had seen the red truck parked outside her street, and how it would vanish the moment she stepped outside to confront it. Her observations were precise. She had taken pictures, drawn maps of where the vehicle had been spotted, and even marked patterns of its movement. She wrote about Randall Miles by name. The final entry, dated the day she went missing, sent chills down the investigator's spines. "He knocked on my door again," she wrote. "Said his truck broke down." It showed that on the night Angela vanished, her phone had moved west, away from her neighborhood, down rural roads leading toward an abandoned barn. Beneath the old floorboards, they discovered a hidden space filled with debris and scattered fabric. Then they found human remains. The condition of the body made identification difficult, but items found nearby, a necklace, a pair of glasses, and dental records confirmed what many had feared. It was Angela. That barn, they soon discovered, belonged to Randall Miles' cousin Ann. Isolated, weather-worn structure, no longer in use. Asked to come in and use the phone. I told him no. He didn't leave right away. I saw him in the driveway, just standing there watching. I'm writing this in case I can't write tomorrow. If something happens, it's him. Forensic teams analyzed the smartphone, managing to recover partial GPS data. Armed with this new information, police secured a warrant and searched the barn. The investigation no longer centered on a missing person. It had become a homicide case. The arrest of Randall Miles came swiftly after the discovery at the barn. Angela Prichard's case moved from unsolved mystery to confirmed murder almost overnight. The most damning piece of evidence, however, was the GPS data retrieved from Angela's damaged phone. Randall's defense was weak. In the aftermath of the trial, Angela's story gained national attention. Her family, though devastated, took some comfort in the fact that Angela had not been forgotten or dismissed. Her voice had carried through months of silence. Angela's case became a symbol of awareness, of resilience, and of refusing to be silenced. She was more than a victim. She was the author of her own justice.